All right, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast here on the E2KG network. I am DBQ Hams. This is episode 154. This is our game experience show for the week of the last week of July 2020. My word, the summer is going fast, and whether you are uh, well, truthfully, hopefully we all are staying safe. Whether you are doing that by yourself, with your friends, with loved ones, either way, we are here every week on the Enough to Keep Going podcast. We hope you will join us as well. Every other week, we have our game experience show. This is our what we've been playing. This is our PickZ PlayZ rundown. And on those off weeks, on the alternative weeks, we dive in with a deep dive episode into the last week and a half, 2 weeks of news, industry analysis, not just kind of the headlines, but a little more analysis as well in terms of what this means for the industry, what it means for kind of gamers, and what it means for you. So thank you for joining us tonight or tomorrow or whenever you are watching this. Please feel free to always participate, and we are glad to have you along on our ride. We are grown-ups who game. We are gentlemen, scholars, technicians. We are sometimes serious, oftentimes foolish, but we are always consistent. So, joining me tonight is Agasicles Stamos. Agasicles, thank you for running the wheels of steel over there and making sure everything is coming together well. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing good, man. I'm pretty excited about gaming.
Well, that's good, right? It's nice to have something to get excited about.
No,
So,
it's just it's easy. It's very easy in this time period with new consoles launching and and seminal games kind of coming to the fore for there to be a lot of negative opinions and sensationalism out on the internet and people commenting who don't understand like how games are put together. So it would be very easy to kind of get down in the dumps right now. And so I've actually been pretty pleased that I haven't gone in that direction. So yeah,
yeah,
and,
that's
and
good. Good to
gaming has
know.
been gaming recently has been very clean and very neat, which is not always the case. Hasn't been messy and jumbled, which is too often the way things go.
So is there a joke in there about the fact that you hooked back up your consoles rather than trying to continually PC build, or where's your
Uh,
clean and neat coming from?
no. I mean, I still build PCs and and monkey with innards as frequently. This is mostly just my recent gaming has been very harmonious. So a lot of shooty pew pew, which makes things pretty focused. So
Nice. That is good because that is exactly what we are up to tonight is to talk about what we have been playing, what our game experiences have been. But before we get into why Agasicles is feeling so upbeat, so harmonious about his game experience, we have to go back to our PickZ PlayZ report. So this is every other week we give ourselves an assignment in terms of diving back into our back catalog, maybe something new that's come out. Usually it's around a theme, and this week's theme was about character development. That oftentimes in other media we see a lot of good character development from sequel to sequel, whether that's over time as characters grow up or as events happen. But oftentimes in games, we don't always get a whole lot of in depth character development. We certainly get repeat characters and sequels, but whether or not we see real growth in those characters is something that is not always present potentially, or it's not always present in the way that it might be in some other media. And so we wanted to look at that a little bit, and I have to say, Agasicles, that for my assignment, I'm pretty sure I'm taking just a straight C on this. Like I came in initially with some lofty expectations. I was going to dive back into the second season of The Walking Dead from Telltale and kind of see how Clementine's story has evolved. And really, what I ended up doing was diving into the expansion for Borderlands 3 for Guns, Love, and Tentacles. This is Sir Hammerlock, who you get introduced to early in Borderlands 2, right? The kind of safari big game hunter, and he had a couple different DLC pieces for some small DLC pieces in uh, Borderlands 2. You met his sister in the pre-sequel, and now in this sequel, we are seeing Sir Hammerlock get married. That he is marrying his spouse. He's marrying the his partner. And his partner is the uh, his Malwin. It's I don't remember his first name, but it is the gun designer of the Malwin guns. Right, that there's many different gun types in Borderlands, and of course, Sir Hammerlock is marrying a gun designer as well. So this is actually it was kind of one, it was interesting to see, like, okay, so did they actually do anything a little bit with his character? The fact that we get a gay marriage in a Borderlands game is kind of a nice nod. The fact that we know some of his family, but at the same time, you it's nice to kind of revisit some of these characters, like Borderlands, for saying what you will about the story, and I don't know that the story is, I would never call it very deep, but it certainly has made good use of its characters in terms of, with Lilith, who was kind of a nameless protagonist in the first game, to then become an ally in the second game, and now she's the leader of the rebels by the third game. That there is some type of progression here, and Sir Hammerlock, I didn't get through the whole story. There's a lot of punchy one-liners and a little bit of some nice little character bits back and forth with him and his fiance as they both are arguing with each other in terms of you know wedding day jitters and big weddings and all kinds of other kind of cliche pieces. But the gameplay is fun. I mean, the Borderlands 3 is pretty fun, and I have not finished the original, the full base game, but I kind of burned out somewhat on the story of it, even though I enjoyed still the gameplay. And so the thing I enjoyed about the DLC here is not only is it a way to revisit some characters, but I've always found the DLC for Borderlands a little more focused than the base game. Like, they'll bring you to a specific area, try to tell you a small little story. In some ways, it's why a 22-minute sitcom comedy can work sometimes a little better than a 90-minute comedy movie, because it's a tighter focus, that they're not trying to do as much, and so they can tell a little tighter story. The jokes can land, or they don't feel as they can be more condensed, so they don't feel as stretched out either. So so I don't know that it really speaks to the actual assignment, even though I still will turn something in on the teacher's desk and hope for a little bit of credit with it as well. So, but in your case, last two weeks ago, you were talking about Last of Us 2, Last of Us Part 2, and Ellie, and this is kind of the impetus for this assignment. And so I want to know, have you had a chance to dig back into Last of Us Part 2? Where are you feeling with the characters and the character development within your experience there?
Yeah, so I'm a little all over the place, and let me. So, man, there's several things to pull apart here. So, I guess the first thing I want to go back to is I was listening to you talk about your gameplay in Borderlands 3 and the setup for the story, um, and I was wait, what did he say? And then finally I kind of caught up to it, and I did come to understand that this was the telling of a homosexual love story or whatever in the game, which is pertinent just because number one today, and I know Swiss tells me to stop scrolling on Twitter, but I came across I think the partially unfortunate part, unfortunate dynamic in it is that a person I follow who I'm good friends with, who he and I are often of the same mind, does what I don't do, which is he will retweet things that he sees from other people that he deliberately doesn't agree with, just to see like the flame spray start. But I love him to death. But this person retweeted a Twitter thread that where somebody was complaining about a screenshot of the homosexual relationship in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and I went over to the thread and just read the first like few things, and there were a lot of things that made me angry, and just people's like the lack of logic in the reasoning. But one of the most stark ones was the person actually saying, "I don't like representation in video games," and so I struggle with that because I'm like, and I've had conflicts with this over the comic book worlds as well, and this is what I always say, right? If like in comics, I the whole race of Inhumans, and we saw it in Agents of Shield as well. Like there's this thing called a Terrigen Mist, and that unlocks people's superpowers. I'm like, if you took a Terrigen Mist bomb and flew over Manhattan and dropped it, you would not get several thousand superheroes who were all white and male, right? That is not the world as it exists today. And so we constantly talk about immersion, and we constantly talk about wanting to be in worlds that make us feel real and grounded. And the fact of the matter is that the world is not monochrome. So the statement that I don't like representation in video games, it's not representation, it's reality. So what you're saying is I don't like reality in my video games. And
Well said, well said, right? I think that is exactly the point. Like that it is not sterilized, whitewashed, it is not homogeneous, that is not reality. And that's a well made point.
Yeah, and I get it. People are like, well, I don't want like social justice or whatever. I don't want this pushing an agenda. And I'm like, welcome to art. Like, welcome to entertainment. Like that's what those things have always been. In many cases, they push cultural envelopes first until society catches up with them, and that those things become normalized. So I don't want to get into whether or not you agree or disagree with homosexuality. My only point is that the fact that it appears in video games is simply a reflection of the world. And if you don't like that, then don't play it, right? The other thing is there was a lot of angst, and it was over a screenshot, right? So, and then people were like, "Well, I hope it's not a choice, and I hope you're not forced to." And I'm like, "But we did this already with Mass Effect," and so it's a whole thing. So my whole point is that the notion of that being a reason to negatively score a game seems or to claim dislike of a game seems very weird to me, and shows a highly biased view of evaluating a game and critiquing a game on its merits. So people who express that opinion, as far as I would concern, I would throw out their opinions on any video game, right? The point is obviously we're now talking about the Last of Us Part Two, which
Before we do that, could
yeah, go
I
ahead.
stick with Borderlands for just
Yeah,
a
yeah,
minute? Because I
absolutely.
think that
Yep.
the Sir Hammerlock point there is really the thing I appreciated of it, and it's that it's the representation in video games. Video games have tried to do that for a long time, just like other media has, but oftentimes it became like tokenism, right? Like it became let's boil this character down into this character is only defined by their sexuality or by their race. And for better or for worse, sometimes Bioware games have done that. But the thing that I appreciated in the Sir Hammerlock piece is it's just a wedding, right? Neither character, neither Sir Hammerlock or Malwyn are presented in nobody's taking one role or the other in the relationship. There's not it's also not played for laughs. Like it's not made more effeminate or kind of leaned into stereotypes for the sake of comedy. There's a wedding going on, and there's plenty of other jokes that happen around the wedding rather than using the sexuality as a place to try to find comedic pieces. And so it's done well. It's done in a tasteful, representative way rather than in kind of a let's play it off for the sake of a joke and still say we're thinking of representation. So that piece there. But I thank you for letting me tangent there for just a minute. But let's go back to Last of Us.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's look the reason. the reason I view it from that perspective is because interracial relationships were viewed the exact same way, right? Like this is just the next wave after that. Like so, it's like my wife is Caucasian, right? It literally it has been within this century that that was actually made not illegal in the state that I live in, right? Like since I've been born, or just before I was born, right? So that's it's just crazy when you think about it from that perspective. So much to do has been made, and I know we're not supposed to spoil it. I don't think it's unknown that Ellie is homosexual. I think that's a known thing. I don't think that's a spoiler for anyone. So much to do has been made about how that's portrayed in this game. It's a little there are difficult things to talk through without spoiling pieces of it, and I won't, and I'll try not to spoil pieces back through the original Last of Us. The general thing. So I've played about 20 hours of the game. It's about a 25-hour long game. I'm hoping and praying that I'm within 2 to 3 hours of completing it. There is just a lot of the game stylistically. So first of all, cutscenes and story moments are too long. I think I mentioned last time that in the first 3 hours of the game there were like 2 instances of combat, one of which wasn't even real combat; it was just systemic combat. Um, there are long stretches of the game where you are not necessarily playing pieces of the story that you want to see unfolded, right? So you're playing through, I guess what I will say is ancillary or tangential content to what you would think is the core story, and that is not enjoyable because you are spending a lot of time constantly questioning, like hours at a time, questioning yourself, why am I doing this? Why is this important? And that's a lot to ask people to buy into a 25-hour game when it's in in if I draw a parallel, in television shows, right? We talk about the Netflix Marvel series. We talk about I'll even say Game of Thrones season one. Like some of these games, Fear the Walking Dead, like some of these some of these television shows that take a long time to kind of warm up, right, to get to the point. But there are moments like on the path to there, like 5 minute stretches, 10 minute stretches, 50 minute stretches of either conversation or a fight where you're like, oh yeah, I see the potential in this thing. You're not necessarily always given that in The Last of Us Part Two. You're really being asked to buy into, hey, I'm gonna get around to the point. Trust me, stick with it. But when you're coming at it, particularly when you haven't played through the entirety of the first Last of Us, if you're not like a Naughty Dog like loyalist, you're like I questioned heavily, like I pulled an all nighter one weekend, just in my effort to just push through the game and hope to finish. Right, I was just into the game and I was like, I just want this to be over. Like this has stopped being interesting to me several hours ago. I I yeah, like I said, it's hard to get into without spoiling it.
That's not a not a unique position. I've heard many people kind of
Right.
say, and people have said it's up to 40 hours depending on where they're at, and they wish it would have been over half that time.
Right. In this, it very much cuts to that point of people who again, we went through this a lot with the Marvel movies. We went with this some of the Batman movies, and we're like, gosh, that would have been such a much tighter movie if they had just cut like 25 minutes of it, right? And that's what a lot of The Last of Us Part Two feels like. The social and cultural things that people have gotten up in arms about, I think, is not worthy of entry into the conversation of critical review of games. Um, I really, if you have sensibilities that are going to be offended, and I accept that you will have sensibilities that are going to be offended. True Blood is not a television show for everyone, right? Some people should not watch that show. You have that choice and you have that option. Nobody held you at gunpoint and forced you to play The Last of Us Part 2. Nobody held you at gunpoint and said, hey, this is a Naughty Dog game, so you have to play it. There are lots of other video games to play. You could have waited 2 weeks and played Ghost of Tsushima, right? So, it's I don't. Yeah, like as I mentioned in the Discord chat, I find I find the notion of user scores thoroughly useless anyway, and user reviews probably less so. Um, but overall, and then as I mentioned last time, you go back to combat, and combat just doesn't become wide and varied enough that it really super becomes interesting. The most interesting moments of combat were when the numbers of enemies increased to and when combat lasted longer, right? Because you have so many instances of combat that are like just quick, like little 2 minute things, and where the enemies are like number. I mean, for a big chunk of the game, the enemy numbers in about um, orders of 5 or 6 at a time, and so you engage with the enemy, you play through that combat, and then you're done. And then it's another 10, 15, 20 minute stretch before, right, you encounter, another set of enemies, right? So the pacing of the game feels not great to me. Um,
Those two feel like they kind of go hand in hand, right? Like the overly long cutscenes and the short gameplay. Like you never quite get into a flow of it,
right,
and that the cutscenes, maybe the story is engaging you, but they're breaking it up enough that you never really stay in that environment either.
right, right. And I mean, the 10, 15, 20 minute stretch, that's not with a cutscene. That's just because you just walk around and loot places and and stop and listen to see if anybody's around, and then they're not, right? So you just move on to like the next place. So, man, I appreciate it feels very much like a JRPG in Western clothing, to a certain extent, and I under this is where I rub up against games that have when you get that sense that there's a little too much zeitgeist around a game, like and you pull back the layers on it, like as in the case with Red Dead Redemption 2. To compare the two though, I will say I didn't. I mean, I put the game down and moved on because I had something else that I wanted to play in another assignment that I need to get onto. I didn't put the game down in disgust, right? Whereas with Red Dead Redemption 2, I was just like, I don't feel like fixing wheels on a wagon. Like that's not gameplay. Like me petting my horse is not gameplay. Um, but in the spectrum of playing a movie and not necessarily playing an action movie, you know, The Last of Us Part Two is kind of a little just a skosh right of center in comparison to Red Dead Redemption Two, which is very far right of center.
So in that comparison, similar to Red Dead, like we can see how well made it is, like the production values and the quality of what's been done, but the enjoyment of what's been created is not what you were hoping for. Is that a good estimation there?
Yeah, again to compare the two, but it's a little give and take, between them and The Last of Us Part Two and Red Dead Redemption Two. But I would say the Red Dead Redemption Two has some very highly rewarding combat sequences. Gunplay feels good in Red Dead Redemption 2. Gunplay does not feel that great in The Last of Us Part 2. Very, very well done, and a lot of hard work put into like the script, and the movements, and moving the characters around, from place to place. All in all, might read like a good book. Not to me, not a great video game, not a fully engaging video game. High production
Yeah.
quality, I get that, but definitely more of the same as Red Dead Redemption 2 in that niche of a thing that's good for a certain type of gamer and a certain number of people. And what I'll rail against, as we go on throughout the year, is the people who will rah it and pat it on the back and say this is a game that everyone should play and this should be video game of the year. And I'm like, I just don't understand. I Destiny 2 doesn't need to be video game of the year, right? But I don't know. More caveats and more characterization around the rationale and the why, than just you know it's a game by Naughty Dog on a platform that people love, and then and therefore that's why it's great. Well, I'm like, no, that reasoning isn't sufficient, for me. So very unfortunate that we didn't have Swiss around tonight, because I really want to hear about Ghost of Tsushima and how that
Yeah, I do. I'm
compares.
I'm curious about to hear about Ghost as well, to see how that compares, and and what his experience has been there, because I know he was very excited about this, about Ghost at least, not so much about Last of Us Part Two. What I guess, because what was your experience or enjoyment level with the first Last of Us? Because I kind of bounced off of it for mainly the world setting. Um, but I've enjoyed other Naughty Dog games, but definitely the combat is still Naughty Dog like combat.
Yeah, but it feels like slower plotting, more methodical, and deliberately in a kind of contrived manner constrained, because it's not Uncharted. Like, it's like the same engine, but their constraints on the things you can do and the speed at which it moves is definitely, it feels like it's like the Uncharted engine, wearing 50-pound dumbbells around its neck, is what it feels like. um, so so back me up. I'm sorry. What was your question again, DBQ?
No, my question was that answers some of it. My other question was related to what was your experience with the first
For
Last
the
of
first one,
Us?
the first one, same thing. As I mentioned a couple weeks ago to Swiss, I don't feel any different. Because my kids are daughters, that there was an emotional hook to how the first one unfolded that I felt much more akin to. Again, God of War, I didn't have the attachment to because I don't have a son, right? So, um, but for Swiss, that appealed much more to him, and I think it hit you a little different as well. So The Last of Us, I was emotionally engaged from the very beginning. Um, I don't know that. I don't know. I will admit it may be a little unfair that I will admit that my optics have probably changed a little. I'm probably. I mean, back then, as we went through the end of the PS3 and the beginning of the PS4, I was staunchly like not a third person action adventure type of person. So a game in that genre that had an emotional appeal to me, I probably gave it a little more of a buy than I would now. Um, but I will also say,
That's fair. Like,
yeah, in a world where the persistent progression type game is more on my plate and is a bigger deal. The Destiny 2s, a healthy amount of shooters being around. This game just may not have been timed super well for me. This may have made a better holiday game, to a certain extent. I'm not sure. But I will say I had higher opinions of The Last of Us Part One, than I did of Part Two. But I'll have to go back and play it. I don't remember cutscenes being as long. I don't remember the pacing being as bad. Um, yeah, yeah,
yeah, no, that's helpful. I think I appreciate the context there of kind of where you're coming at this lens from, and everything you've said. Certainly, I feel like you've justified it well. That it doesn't, I have certainly heard it played out similarly. It does seem like it is a polarizing game, but not in like the kind of controversial way, but more in like the people really haven't bought into the narrative, or and enjoyed that, or they've are kind of in your camp of, yeah, well, it's not all that it's cracked up to be.
yeah, yeah. I will
So
say a heavy dose of marketing too, right? Which is where I soundly pointed the finger on the original Destiny, right? I felt like the original Destiny was a fine game. I think the way it came off in marketing, was problematic. We can kind of say the same thing about No Man's Sky, and I mean more than look. There's a bucket of games that aren't marketed at all, right? And that's a thing, right? That's a little more clear and obvious. I think the things we've pointed out are things where the intent of the game and how the game plays isn't messaged on point, and so it's conveyed as a thing that it isn't in reality, and it doesn't feel the same way that it was messaged. And so one of those things is a lot of messaging and marketing around this game as a combat tour de force, and a lot of verbiage lent to how visceral and violent the combat is, and yes, some of that is against essentially zombie equivalents, so you don't really care, right? Um, there in the problem I will say probably maybe one of the biggest problems. The problem with the combat against humans is that it can't just be visceral; it has to be emotional. I go back to Activision's Gun, which I played on PC. Wow, man, it had to be like early 2000s. Um, a predecessor to Red Dead Redemption, the first one. But the thing that I always note about Gun is it had a villain that I despised. And for a person who doesn't complete a lot of games, I stuck with that game and pushed it through to completion just because I was like, I have to get this guy back for what he's done. There was a lot of messaging in around The Last of Us Part Two that made it feel like you knew, like some like when you engage in that visceral combat with a human, that you were exacting vengeance, that you like knew that person, but you don't, right? They're all just kind of people from an organization, but you don't have any emotional, like, I got to get that guy back hook to the vast majority of the people that you run into. And so that messaging is part of what makes the combat fall flat. If this wasn't, The Last of Us Part One was not advertised as a big combat game, but this one definitely was, and I find it falls a little short of that messaging.
So let's move to something that you have stuck with and have come back to time and time again, which is World of Warplanes. So 2 weeks ago on our assignment, we were talking about war games, and this one popped up. But also, you've been playing it probably now on and off for the last couple months. So, how's it been? What's keeping your attention to it?
Actually, it's not. So this is a bounce off game, and it's code. So I did find the game attractive. Again, a persistent progression model, lots of unlocks, kind of harken back to that um, those younger years of playing, the Need for Speed kind of games where, you were just given a car to start off with, and your whole mission was to unlock, the remaining 99 cars, right? And that was I loved that, and like having more cars in your garage and constantly seeing, your scroll thing, populate, from a bunch of shadows, to actual vehicles in those paddocks. The problem with World of Warplanes is there is something going on, and it took me a while to piece it together. But I saw enough buzz about it on the internet, where there is an inconsistency in how it deals with joysticks, and so I experienced, and people can say whether there are plenty of people out there who are like, it works for me, and that's great. I have more than one PC and I have more than one flight control system. So when I see the same thing across multiple combinations of that, then that's definitively for me not anecdotal. So I got 3 joystick disconnects, and when I say joystick, I mean whole flight control system. So joystick and a throttle lever. I got 3 joystick disconnects across 2 different PCs. So that appears to me to be something systemic, and there was a whole period last year where they were trying to address a certain type of bug. And after that bug was addressed in 2019, there were pockets of people who said works for me and pockets of people who said it's still a problem. I just got to the point where I was like, I can't, fortunately, thank goodness for the Star Citizen experience, because that taught me, despite the fact that I love a genre, I'm at a point now where I can't spend time playing bad, broken games, even for the types of games that I love. So, the time management scenario was I would play for, an hour. And so in one case, I played like for 2 hours straight. And then just as I was wrapping up, like I lost control of the aircraft, like it would only bank right or whatever, in various fault and casualty modes of you could restore it by unplugging the joystick and plugging it back in. Oftentimes, it would come back after you bounced out and went back into like the next match. Sometimes it would come back after you restarted the game. My problem was it was highly inconsistent, and a lot of times, it would break and you just couldn't get the control back. So I enjoy it, and also good that I talked to another person who also plays a lot of the wargaming.net games, a streamer named Fragmentation, I think. I think he's got a 4 for the A and a 3 for the E, but he's pretty popular. Has lots of people who are trying to learn wargaming.net games come by his stream. And he also had a negative opinion of World of Warplanes. Actually, between the two, spends his time playing Digital Combat Simulator, which I also have, but he and I both agree that is a that is not a game, for men who are fearful of commitment, right? Like, it's and I say that jokingly. I mean, women obviously can play the game too, but it's a game that requires a lot of focus and commitment, and like per airframe. So I have the game with multiple plugins for different aircraft, but just like squirreling away the time to focus on that game just isn't there. The biggest problem I have right now with World of Warplanes, and I think I had built myself up to going back to it and then fell off, is that what I talked myself through was I was like, but so I do like World of Warplanes the game. I don't like World of Warplanes as a flight sim. And I was like, okay, so there you are. I said, well, hold on a second, but I liked, gosh, what was the name of that game? Chris Roberts, Freelancer. I like Freelancer, which is a space sim. Didn't have joystick support. I also like No Man's Sky, which is a space sim, and as far as I know, doesn't have native joystick support on PC. I like both of those games. They have a shtick and a do loop that I enjoy playing through. And so I was trying to convince myself, but you would be okay going back. You would be okay going back to World of War Sims and playing with mouse and keyboard, which I had previously convinced myself I wouldn't. I said, but those are space sims. There's a certain degree of like the control scheme for space sims is a little more flexible and with latitude. We've seen plenty of like sci-fi shows where it's not necessarily a joystick that the person is using to like in my head. Uh, uh, you know, there are space fighter. This is all fictional. There are space fighter craft that have to. But my point is that I feel like my enjoyment of a space sim is not solely limited to playing it with a joystick, although that's what I prefer. But a game that is grounded in atmospherics. Like I feel like I don't know that I want to spend time playing a World War II flight sim and not be on a joystick on joystick. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, I'm bouncing off of this game just for that reason.
Well, I think that makes sense. I mean, because you have the joystick accessible and you know that feeling, and there is a cognitive connection there with the subject area, where in a in a space sim, you're right, there is a little more disconnect. There's the suspension of disbelief, um, and so yeah, that's interesting because I so World of Tanks, is that still in your rotation because it doesn't have flight
Yeah,
stick kind
Wor-
of code glitch pieces?
yeah. World of Tanks and World of Warships is still firmly on my roster, but that I'm pulling World of Warplanes off. Which there was a certain skosh of me that was like I'd really like to like have in my playlist like the full set. But I don't play World of Tanks Blitz, which for some people who do play Wargaming.net games, they play all of them, including World of Tanks Blitz. But I will say I'm not the only Wargamer.net person who doesn't play World of Warplanes. So plenty of people play all of their other games except World of Warplanes because of there are lots of people who don't find it fun, for different reasons.
Great. Well, I'm gonna move on to a game that I've found more fun than I expected, which is Paper Mario Origami King. So, just coming off Bug Fables with my son, which is very much in the traditional kind of Paper Mario RPG kind of turn-based world. Paper Mario the Origami King is not that. I don't know that it's even really an RPG. It's much more of a spiritual successor to Super Paper Mario from the Wii. There's not a leveling system. There's not stats to the same effect. You have items. Most of the items are, you have a base item of like a hammer or boots or other things. But then, similar to Sticker Star, some of those items do go away or get used up, but it's only kind of the higher, more damage or the special ones. So you always have kind of base items in that combat, and the combat is actually pretty fun. I don't know if you've kind of had a sense or seen some of it. The combat ends up being like little puzzles. You get into you're in the overworld, you run into an enemy, or if you initiate an attack, you'll get the standard kind of additional turn. Um, but then when you get into a combat, they are little puzzles that in the main aspect that you are there's centrifugal rings and you're rotating them to try to line up um, the enemies in such a way that you can chain together your attack. Or you will push them in a row or pull them forward so they'll loop around and come around the other side of the circle. So you kind of got a couple different motions to try to, it's almost like a spinning plate puzzle, right? That you're spinning tiles that you're trying to get them lined up in the best order, but you also have a limited time. You start off with 30 seconds. You can get upgrades, or you can get kind of charms. You can get badges. You can get kind of equipable items, whatever they're called, that give you some additional time. Or if you go ahead.
So one of the things I don't understand is so so and it's along the lines of the why would I play this? And like I've seen the review scores. I know that it's a very popular game. I know that it's a good game. What I don't understand is how does this fit within like Mario lore or I think more so like in the product realm. So I get that there are certain Mario games, right, that repeat, right, on a given cycle.
Right,
Um,
it's not a 3D adventure and it's not a 2D side scroller.
right. No, 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 right. So, but is this the first paper? This isn't the first Paper Mario, right?
No, this is the mm, eighth, maybe. I mean, they've been
Okay.
around for. I mean, if you count some, but there's of the main Paper Marios, it's probably the fifth or sixth.
Right. So that's I guess part of what I'm looking for is how is this a progression? I mean, what was the last one? If you could help remind me, but and how is this a progression from that one? And how does this did you play the last one? How does this compare? Is this kind of what you? Because the problem with the Mario game is like each one, even within that genre, is sometimes often largely a different game and gameplay style. And again, like I played I forget what the Yoshi's whatever thing from last year. That's
Oh yeah, Crafted
different
World.
than the
Yep.
previous Yoshi, right? And may not have been it's weird. Like I feel like as Nintendo fans, and I don't know that I'm a Nintendo fan. I'm a Switch owner. I've participated in the ecosystem, but like I wouldn't be wrapped around the axle about Yoshi not being the same as the last Yoshi, right? So
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, I think that okay, so lineage wise, all these are kind of a subgenre out of the Mario kind of pantheon. They all kind of spin out of Super Mario RPG from the Super Nintendo. You had Paper Mario and Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, which were kind of the traditional turn-based ones. You also had kind of the Mario and Luigi by Alpha Dreams, which were on Game Boy Advance, and then DS and 3DS. There was the last two were Sticker Star on 3DS and Color Splash on um, on Wii U. Took me a minute there, but uh, sorry Wii U. That it is they had more kind of consumable items, and then the Wii game, the Super Paper Mario was almost more like a it was Paper Mario, but in kind of a traditional Mario skin that you were moving around a big open world, but action was real time. You would bounce on enemies, you would throw fireballs, but all kind of in the Paper Mario aesthetic. Why somebody would play this, I would say if you haven't if you don't have any context for the other games and you haven't played them, the reason that I'm finding this game enjoyable is uh, you're not playing it for the platforming challenges. The writing is really sharp and funny. There's a lot of there's some puzzles around the world. There's a lot of hidden toads that you are finding, and there's a lot of kind of flavor text. They give a lot of characterization to the Mario world. So you know if there are kids that are interested in Mario, that this ends up being kind of where the Mario stories get developed, because the 3D, the platformer games don't necessarily have that. But even in, you're not playing through this. I'm not going to spend an all nighter trying to push through this because I care about the story, like you did with Last of Us, right? Like this is the fun part about this is the whimsy and the kind of colorfulness in the open world. It's kind of, it's a Saturday morning cartoon. It's a, you know, chocolatey, fruity bowl of cereal in my pajamas, right? I
But
mean,
but there is a
there's some
but there is a story there that makes it more akin to. While the graphics are largely different, I get that, but at the end of the day, you're playing through something that's sort of like an Elder Scrolls.
you're playing through something that is, that is an RPG
Yeah,
in its story, right?
yeah.
Like there is an invading prince who has taken over the Mushroom Kingdom. You are teamed up with his sister, who you're trying to stop him. By the nature of these games, you usually end up teaming up with Bowser in some way because he's not the big bad. Um, so in some ways, there's some nice character development for you know, there's a lot of character development in terms of giving giving life to what are normally just grunt enemies in Mario. That you have a lot of, you know, the different toads have different conversations. The different Goombas, make jokes. That there are some funny things like, because of and this is I've seen this example and I've seen other people use it as well, but it's a nice example of you're peeling back things in the world because of the paperness, and you
Mm, okay.
discover a dry bones, which is like a Koopa Troopa without, it's all just skeleton. And the the princess says, not the but the extra character, the new character says, "Oh no, he's been in there so long that, he's nothing but skin and or no bones left," or like that type of thing, right? So there's some humor there,
so
and at the
so is it
go
as
ahead.
actiony as Breath of the Wild?
No, no, because then you end up on a when you get into combat, you're in kind of a arena. You're secluded. You do the traditional kind of JRPG kind of breakout of the combat, and you're in a specific space. And then the combat actually is it's a puzzle. And the as I was talking about with the enemies, you're trying to line them up within a certain time period, or then within the bosses that the role flips. I've only been through two bosses at this point, but the role flips, and you're on the outside of the ring and the boss is on the inside of the ring, and you're putting together almost like chains of logic that get you to the inner circle. That you have stamps that say go right or left or jump, or so you're putting these things together so that you can get up close to the boss to be able to attack them. And again, you're trying to do this within a certain time period. And so for me, it's been fun. I'm playing it with my son, so actually having two people kind of look through the puzzles and try to figure that out. Like sometimes he'll get something quickly, or he'll be starting to think about it, and I'll be like, okay, switch here, and then go out to that ring and turn it to the left. So it becomes a nice kind of asynchronous couch co-op type of game.
Very cool. How's the art and how are the graphics?
Um, Playing it both in handheld and on 4K. I know it's a Switch on a 4K, but um, the graphics are nice, right? I mean, they're bright, they're colorful, they look like you know they look like they were drawn with markers. It's not so much in the crafted world type of thing where you see kind of the marker lines. They're filled in, but they're very very bright and colorful. It's kind of fun. Some of the bosses, or all the bosses, have kind of an artistic spin to them. Like you play a set of colored pencils, or you play a rubber band man. So they're definitely playing on the kind of coloring book aspect of the game. Fun, definitely enjoyable. It's I'm gonna keep playing it because it's enjoyable, but it's also enjoyable in small bursts. Like it doesn't. I'm not. I don't need to sit down and dive into this because of the mechanics. I'm gonna forget certain combos. It
Yeah.
becomes a instead of watching a movie together with my son, maybe we'll pick this up and kind of play through a chapter or two.
Yeah, it's a little bit like an erector set, and it's a game that it's fine for it to go in the backlog.
Yeah, right. It's something that we'll definitely be chipping away at, but it's not gonna. I'm not gonna kind of marathon, and it's easy to consume and enjoyable every time you pick it up. It's a so that's good. It does what it's supposed to do, and it does it well. I think if people know what it is coming in, they'll be able to kind of set expectations accordingly. So, speaking of doing what it does very well, as you've been talking about your shooty pew pew, I saw that you, well, it's not surprising that any of us on this podcast are back into Destiny 2, but you're back into it on the Xbox One. One, it's a console that you have disconnected and then come back to, but you own it in multiple places, so why on the one?
Yeah, well, I was hoping you wouldn't give me a question that meaty because I really wanted to just kind of hit this very quickly and move on to F1 2020 because I know we're running short on
We don't have
time.
to talk about the game. Yeah, I'm just curious about why your choice of picking it up on this
Yeah,
platform.
just because I made that decision last year to like not collapse all the. I would certainly say if I had chosen to just pick three characters to rule them all, I don't know that I would bother spending time playing it on multiple platforms now. But now since I have like 10 to 12 guardians all on different platforms, like there's a certain level of obligation and fun that I get to progressing all of them. The things I will mention about this while I'm on it is the biggest thing about this was I was looking forward to playing with my Elite Controller V2, which I did. It's a really enjoyable experience. Like I don't mind controllers anymore, and I'm okay with there not being joysticks and wheel and pedals on Xbox. Right? That I have. I mean those things are there, but I find them a pain to procure them. Like that V2 controller is amazing. That being said, I played it and I was like, man, if I only play my Xbox with this, I'm gonna wind up having to get a second one just because of wear and tear. So I did. I spent some time playing with it, but then I put it back on its charger and I broke out one of my regular controllers. I grabbed my one of my. I have two Design Labs controllers, and I played with one of those. Which and again, I was like, the Xbox controller is just good. Like I just enjoy playing with. I don't enjoy playing with the PS4 controller. It's like an obligation or a thing that I have to do, but I don't really like enjoy it. What I will say about the experience, and I really didn't do much more than like go. I wanted. I was working bounties, which I don't normally do. I was working a bounty. That bounty involved doing a Nightfall strike. I wanted to do a Nightfall strike, but I hadn't done enough of the Red War campaign to unlock strikes, so I had to go back and do more of the Red War campaign and talk to Zavala. And then I got the strikes unlocked. And then the Nightfall strikes had a minimum light score of 800 required, so I had to go back and grind to get up to that. It was fun. It was fine. Some of the other stuff I had to do, I had to run strikes anyway. But the one thing that I was really curious as I was in this weird place of like progression, and I think on Stadia is the one where I've done it as the first light campaign. So it was a brand new character. I actually had to go through the original Destiny part that they've mapped in. One of the things that's highly curious to me now is they get ready to vault certain planets. So for instance, in the fall, they're going to vault Io. If you're brand new coming to the game, which is part of the big allure that if you're getting a Series X and you're on Game Pass and you don't already own Destiny, you're going to be getting Destiny 2 for free for the first time and you're going to get everything. Part of the Red War campaign goes through Io. So what do you do like when they vault stuff? I'm very curious to see how they're going to deal with like how do you vault things that are inherent requirements, right? And how do you walk past that? And obviously, I'm on my tirade about broken missions in 2020, so it'll be curious to just see how they manage that. It's a curious conundrum that I look forward to seeing them untie.
Yeah, no, I have been thinking about that, but truthfully, I haven't looked it up in terms of, I could see where it could be possible just to have the assets for that mission rather than the entire open kind of patrol space, which is a different set of assets. I mean, sometimes you overlap those assets, but oftentimes they're a little more confined. But I don't have confirmation on that, but that's definitely something uh, that I am interested in. But you mentioned wheel and pedals, so let's go on to your next game. And are you playing F1 2020 with wheel and pedals or with controller?
I'm not playing with controller because I don't have wheel and pedals on the Xbox One. For the second year in a row, as far as I could tell, the place where F1 this year's iteration of F1 plays best is on Xbox, which is amazing. You would think that it would for years past every version that came out played best on PC. The last 2 years, the trend has been a better mounting opinion on the Xbox version. So I played F1 2019 on Xbox, and I played F1 2020 on Xbox. An interesting thing um, is, again, we keep harping on Game Pass, and I personally think Game Pass is a good deal. I think several other co-hosts think it's a good deal as well. Um, if you didn't play F1 2019 on PC last year, it is now on Game Pass. So if you're a Game Pass subscriber, you can play F1 2019 on PC as well. So I pulled it down tonight. I have it on Xbox. I pulled it down tonight on PC. A couple like the biggest key differences. I talked a little bit last year about how they injected story into F1 2019, and that it's it's not as far as like bling my pad or whatever the thing is on NBA 2K, um, and Madden and all that kind of stuff. But there are story beats in the opening of Formula One. You have a rival, you have a teammate. There's this rivalry between those two, and the whole thing unfolds. As a result of that, or interwoven with that, you would go into the F1 season as a Formula 2 driver, and so the notion was that you were competing for an F1 seat. Um, this year, there is no story element for the F2 part of it, but amazingly, just because it's different, not because last year's iteration was bad, but this year, what they did, they gave you the option. I think they gave you the option to not play any F2, to play half an F2 season, or to play the full F2 season, which to me is amazing. This is as if you were given NCAA football, or at least a season of NCAA football packaged with Madden. Um, and that's how I'm playing it. I'm playing the full F2 season, so I'm going to compete for an F1 seat, see how the dice roll, and see who gives me the invitation, or who tries to hire me, and then roll into F1. So and it's actually awesome because I don't know a lot about F2 because I haven't spent as much time watching it as I have Formula One. So it's neat to drive the cars. The big thing about F2 is that unlike F1, where there's all individual teams and there's a set of regulations that they all have to be compliant with, but how they build their cars and how they tune their cars is all different. In Formula 2, it's the exact same car. And so everybody's on a completely even playing field. So that's interesting. Yeah, so it's graphics look great, gameplay is great, feels wonderful with the V2 controller. Um, I am everybody knows I'm a Codemasters fan, so I go,
That is true. That is true. I was curious about the F2 in terms of if the cars handle differently, but what you're saying there in terms of the everything spec the same, is an interesting difference between F1 where different teams may, strategize and have strengths in
yeah.
terms of their engines and
Yeah, I really like its
everything.
approach to difficulty levels. So it has difficulty profiles with presets that align to those profiles, and then you can select a profile, then you can tweak certain ones. So I play with automatic transmission. I don't play with manual transmission, but I do play at expert level. So I can keep all the expert difficulty things the same, and then switch the transmission. Um, one of the biggest things this year is for people who keep up with the motorsport. I can't remember when this was injected, but the cars now have a halo, so they have a ring that is just above center of the I'm about to say pilot of the driver's helmet. And then it has a centerpiece that comes down. So you actually don't have an unoccluded forward view. You have this halo ring that is up above your center of view, and then you have this thing down the middle, which isn't that big a deal, except it occludes the racing line. So sometimes if you enable that, and at expert level, the racing line is not complete, doesn't completely go away. It's just only present in corners. So here you are racing down towards this corner, and I never race on the formal driving line, which is one of my sticks. So it's sometimes hard for me to pick up where the racing line is. But yeah, it's great. It's been really enjoyable getting back to that series.
Fun, fun, fun. So you had talked about Game Pass being an excellent deal, and I agree, and that's where my next game comes from as well. So I played a little bit of Carrion. This is the Devolver Digital published game. This is where you are the monster, you are the beast, you are this maw of a creature with tentacles, and it released this past week and was day and date on Game Pass as well. So it's a Metroidvania like game. There's some exploration, you get some power-ups, there's some save, locations. It has that same type of kind of structure. The map, gates you in different spots, or the map actually has a Metroid looking piece in terms of each different room and how they're connected together. Um, but wow, it is fun to play. I mean, the movement of the monster is quick, is fast. It feels really empowering as you're kind of whipping around and sliding on walls and climbing up things. Um, I was flying through it and just devouring stuff and whipping through and killing people until I realized they don't always die really quickly, right? Like just in a good monster movie, somebody comes back, somebody gets injured and there's a giant gash across them, but they still have just enough energy to pull out the shotgun and kill the monster. So that happened to me, right? I'm in this room and I am. The thing that is fun about this is not only is the movement fun, but then once you get into a room and you see where your enemies, where you see where the humans are, like once they start having weapons that can injure you, um it becomes almost like a little puzzle. Like, okay, now if I drop down and get this guy, or if I shoot a web at this guy or throw a door at him or a crate, I can knock him out, which and then I can come around on the other side, and like, so it's almost in that kind of Rainbow Six type of kind of XCOM kind of strategy in terms of where you're going to go, how you're going to attack a room. And so I started doing that, and then I realized that I hadn't completely killed the human, and so I died. And then I realized that you have to kind of sit on the human. You have to eat them up, right? You got to devour them. You're the monster. So you get into this, like, so then I started playing instead of kind of just whipping through and trying to, like, be the kind of frantic rage monster. I was kind of hunting from the shadows, that I grab somebody and then come back up to a a corner where I was safe and then devour them to get a little more power and some health back. And then I'd come back around, and I mean, it ends up really getting into. I played with the lights off. It's not a scary game at all, because it's kind of tongue in cheek in those ways. There's great atmosphere. The music is good. It's all pixel art, so it's not it's not gonna there's no realism here in this. But at the same time, I got into this, kind of mindset of you know I'm the monster. I'm the alien in the vents, coming down at different points in time and sneaking away before somebody else can see me, right? I'm going through, I'm not coming in hot into every room.
Right. Are there any co-op or multiplayer elements to this at all?
Not at this
Does
point. I mean, I could see where they could do something like a co-op, which would be really interesting. There's no multiplayer. That would even be an interesting piece. Um,
Do you think this is a
yeah,
game? So I actually read our agenda wrong. I thought you had actually played this game on Switch. Do you think it's a game that you would play on Switch?
yeah. I think it is fine. I hear it controls well. I think it would play well on most. My only concern on Switch would be that on the Xbox, on a large TV, there's a lot of shadows and darkness, intentionally, right? And so if I'm playing on a handheld on the Switch, um, depending on where I'm at and if the light source is, if I lose some of that definition and that makes it a little more difficult, I think it would play fine on a TV on the Switch as well. But um, but I could see, it is kind of a fun little pick up and play because of the nature of it in that kind of Metroid Castlevania style. You have specific save spots. It's not like it's auto saving or you can do a save scum from room to room. It'll if you die, it'll bring you back to kind of your last load space. But if you close the game down and come back, you're going to end up at your where you saved last. And um, the portability of it would be nice, but at the same time, it's not kind of like a pick up and play for 20 minutes necessarily. But all those save spots, at least at this point, I'm only an hour in. Sounds like it's only like a 3-4 hour game, maybe, so it's relatively short. The save spots have all been close enough together that I don't feel like I've lost any type of real progress when I've died. Um, so yeah, it's fun. I'm glad, and again, I'm glad I'm playing it. It's a nice kind of, you know, definitely a different kind of palette cleanser compared to Paper Mario and its cartoony graphics. Um, but it definitely enjoyable. And if you have Xbox Game Pass or Game Pass on PC, it's right there for you, and it's a 800 and 900 megabytes, so it's a quick download and play. All right, we are getting close to the end of our time, but I also this past week Xbox did, along with when they did their showcase last week, they put out a series of 70 different game demos on Xbox that were available for 4 or 5 days. I think 5 days or so, and I played 30 of them. I just kind of got into this kind of like I'm walking through the booth at E3, just kind of making my way, or at PAX, and just kind of playing a quick little demo of a variety of games. And so I even took notes on them, right? I mean, was because eventually they start kind of blurring together in terms of you play that many, and it's like, okay, well, which pixel art roguelike did I play, and what was it called? Um, so of all the different ones, there are some that are kind of really interesting, kind of stylistically. Um, there's one that was called The Veil, where you play a blind character, and for the first part of the game, all you have is sound, and you see little specks of light as you're moving, and you need to kind of navigate the world without anything. Um, Stylistically, that was really interesting. Um, Stylistically, there's a
Who was
beautiful
the?
game.
Do you remember who the developer was on that?
Oh no, I don't. I
Okay, yeah, no
can
problem.
look it up. Uh, Phage, Faji. It's set in India. It was a game actually that was kickstarted back in 2015-16, but it got picked up by kind of picked up to be published by Square Enix, but it's a third-party smaller studio. It was one of their kind of indie initiative pieces, and it plays kind of like Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light, kind of that top-down isometric puzzler, but really fluid combat and a sense of style and motion. You've got a lot of, you're a trapeze artist in India, and it's set within kind of the religion, the Hindu religion. And so the gods are talking to you. It's almost, it's it's that same type of wrapper of Greek mythology that God of War does, without the kind of over the top sexuality and violence. That its tone is one of reverence in those, but you are fighting. You're fighting demons, and you're battling on the side of the gods, at least for now. And there's potential some hints at some twists there as well. But you've got movement in terms of kind of running up walls and doing kind of attacks, midair combos, and climbing up pillars and being able to. There's a lot of mobility to the combat, so you're not kind of stuck on the ground in an isometric view. It's one of the few of the 30 demos. It is one of the three that I played through all the way to the end of the demo. It's something I'm really looking forward to. Another game that was a lot of fun that I played through is Welcome to Elk, which is kind of an adventure game, kind of in a Cartoon Network kind of, or Adult Swim type of graphic style. Uh, Interesting sense of humor. Not really sure what the game is about, but it is kind of it's an adventure. I mean, it is a PC adventure game, right? It's that old school kind of dialogue trees, and kind of sometimes you know pixel hunting, but a lot of it is just dialogue at this point. A couple others that were really fun, some throwback games in addition to the deluge of pixel art ones, but there was kind of a fun cartoon Saturday morning cartoon type of style 2D side scroller called Gauntlet Force. Kind of plays out like a pretty uh, kind of a combo of like 8-bit Ninja Gaiden and Contra. So not so much high pace there, but kind of you got some, you get some skills and action pieces there. And then Mayhem Brawler is again a great art style, very similar to Streets of Rage 4 in terms of its art style, and actually in terms of its gameplay. In some ways, it probably has been in development for a very long time because it's a small studio, and it probably will lose some of its impact because Streets of Rage 4 has already come out, but it's in that same type of side-scrolling brawler.
Okay, so it's a 2D side scrolling with a partial
Yep, 2D
isometric
side-scrolling
view. Yeah.
brawler.
Okay, cool.
Yep. So the last two games that I want to hit on were multiplayer games. My sons and I spent actually most of the weekend playing two multiplayer games in here. The two couch co-ops. There are a bunch of different couch co-op ones. One is Kung Fu Kickball, which is kind of a combination of if you put together Smash Brothers and Rocket League, and so you are fighting each other, but also trying to kick the ball into a goal at the same time, which as you're sitting elbow to elbow on a couch, certainly makes for some loud moments, maybe when the rest of the house is trying to sleep later at night. Um, and then the other game we played is called Unspottable. It is it feels kind of like we've seen games like this before. We've seen mini games like this before where you are all kind of the same character, but you're trying to basically punch each other. You're in a set screen, and there's 30 similar characters, and you are three of the 30, and so you need to figure out which one is the human controlled one versus the AI controlled one, and the last one standing wins that round. And so you don't really want to, right? You don't want to go around punching because you give yourself away. You want to, careful with your movements. And so there's different maps that maybe the light shines differently, or some of the characters, punch in rhythm, and so you need to kind of match that rhythm sometimes to disguise you. Again, it's probably going to be a $10 game. It's not a huge piece. Maybe it's $15. Maybe it comes out on Game Pass, but it was something where we came back to time and time again, and probably logged. I would say we probably logged 5 hours in 3 days with it. So lots of fun. So lots of good stuff out there. It was a really cool concept, right? To throw a bunch of these indie games out here that wouldn't necessarily ever get showcased uh, one of the streaming shows, or not going to catch a whole lot of press, and to give people a chance to kind of play around and see some stuff. But for me, it definitely gave me things to get excited for, and things that I've put on my want list, or whatever my list is called on Xbox, that kind of helps me keep track of something that's coming up. Any other games that you've been playing that you want to hit on here, Gascles, before we wrap up the evening?
Yeah, I won't talk about Fortnite, which is another game that I've been playing, but I will mention, so when we talk about lists and spreadsheets. So playing Fortnite, the one thing that I realize, and now what I'm trying to contend with in the gaming world, this new gaming world, is, so I've bought the most recent Fortnite season pass and bought the most recent Destiny 2 season pass. Those things are not equal. For a Fortnite season, it's actually only about 10 weeks. So now I got to kind of re-engineer my mind to think about, okay, Fortnite is 5 seasons a year. What does that mean? The Destiny 2 season pass is good until November 10th. So it's much longer. The progression model is much different. The whole reason this came up is because this time I talked about having a little more clarity on how I approach games. Is, one of the things that I added was, now I add, when I bought a season pass onto my spreadsheet, as a reminder that, hey, you have a certain amount of obligation here. And the additional thing that I've noted now is that I now note on that spreadsheet is when that season began, when I bought the season pass, and when it ends. And so now, in the past, I was just always like, oh, I'd read an article, or it'd come up in my Google feed or something, like, oh, season's ending, like I better get on it. Now it's, again, so I've bought the Fortnite season pass. I have 5 weeks to go. I have to set some metric that says, how much of it am I going to play through until I've achieved my ROI. In a world where that ROI, again, not like a new game. New game can go into a backlog. You can capture your ROI whenever you want to. a season pass, at a certain point goes away, right? So it's interesting having those two games and having that comparison now, and having both of them contending for my time on, how much time am I going to put into each.
Yeah, I've done the when I didn't pick up this current season of Destiny. The previous season I did, and was disappointed, obviously, as we talked about. But I wrote it down in my spreadsheet. Like I wrote down, and mine is usually more about how much I'm spending on games and price per games and things like that. But it helped remind me, like, oh yeah, I did spend money on this game recently. Like, I've done the same when I've purchased in-game currency for a mobile game. I usually that helps keep track of things. I do the same with I did it with GameFly. I do it with Game Pass, right? I divvy that up over the 12 months and say, okay, this is how much I'm spending each month. And then I list the games that I've played new that month via that service. Going back to the ROI aspect, like, okay, so this month, I spent $6 on EA Origin Premier, but what did I actually play out of it? And Rocket League or Rocket Arena, right? Okay, so sometimes I get some value out of it, and sometimes I don't. And one, it's also made me sometimes go in and kind of dig back through those catalogs because I'm trying to get some ROI out of that month. Like nothing new came out on EA Origin because it's EA. So what did they put in that service that maybe I want to try that I wouldn't have normally played? Trying to figure out how to get a good return on my investment there. So I think that's interesting. And the Destiny piece obviously has been delayed, so you do have a little more time to play with that versus September 20th when it was, or 22nd when it was originally coming. Um, so I'll be curious, like in 4 weeks, 6 weeks from now, to see how that tracking of owning two different season passes, how you're balancing that with all your other games as well. So it'll be interesting. All right. So, everybody else who's out there listening, that if you've got suggestions for Agasicles in terms of how to balance his season pass workload, and schedule his project management of his season passes, let us know. We have plenty of ways to get a hold of us here, and you can find us on Enough to Keep Going on the E2KG network, on YouTube, on variety of podcast streams, on uh, what are we on? Stitcher, SoundCloud. We're on
Spotify,
podcasting.
Pocket Casts, and
Spotify.
SoundCloud. Yeah, as well as
There we
YouTube,
go.
obviously.
Yes,
Yep.
on YouTube. So we are close to wrapping up here, but because this is our gaming experience show, we need to give ourselves another assignment. So this past 2 weeks ago, or a week ago now, we saw a lot of British studios in the Microsoft press conference, right? We saw Rare, we saw Lionhead. We've got a variety. I think Turn 10 is out there as well, right? Isn't it?
Playground Studios. Yep.
Yep,
Yep.
Playground
Yeah,
Studios.
both of
Not
those.
Lionhead. See, I was thinking of Fable, but it's yeah, but it's Playground Studios. So what we are looking for is looking at some UK-based game studios. That there's a variety of games that are currently out from UK game studios, or things that have come out in the past from UK game studios. Seeing if what kind of flavor do they have? Do we get a little different texture? Definitely in the Fable types of games, we get some different senses of humor. Do we get a focus on different types of physics in racing games? What are some of the things that we're going to get from those studios? So we'll see what we pick. We see what we will get. Swiss has already put his claim down here for Sherlock Holmes Crime and Punishment, which is kind of an adventure story based game. Agasicles, you put yourself down for
Yeah,
another
Forza Horizon
playground
4. Yep.
games one, right?
Yep.
Forza Horizon 4. And I think I'm going to be diving into Media Molecules Dreams, because Dreams just released a VR mode in the past week or so, the past 2 weeks. So having a chance to get back into that and see what has been done within the VR aspect of Dreams from Media Molecule. All right. Well, I guess thank you for our show tonight. I know it was just you and I, so thanks for putting up with me. Swiss was not here to referee us, but no, I think we had always a very good conversation. lots of good topics, and I hope everybody listening and watching has enjoyed as well. So, for myself, DBQ Hams, for Gasically Samus, and for all of us here on the Enough to Keep Going podcast on the E2KG network, thank you for joining us. Thank you for playing along. Uh, Stay true to yourself. Stay good to yourself. Stay good to those around you. Play the games you love and love those you play with. Good night, everybody.
So that was a great outro. I'm just going to put one little stinger on it, and this next week. So next week is a deep dive, industry, business, and news cycle. Swissguard will host, although sometimes life happens, and so that's the plan. That may change. You never know. Swissguard is supposed to host, and actually all four co-hosts will be on the show theoretically, as long as things stay on the rails. That was it. And with that, I'll go ahead and take us out.
That right. We need to tease what's coming next. So, thank you very much for catching that.